Hey everybody, welcome to week 6. And this is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important week of our shortened summer term course. And here's why. We're checking off 2 big ticket items this week, 2 very important assignments that are worth a healthy amount of points. We've got the midterm exam covering chapters 1 through 9. That's worth 50 points. That's due this week by Friday. And then we have step 3 of the research project, or your final research paper. And that's due by Saturday, and it's worth 70 points. So there's a total of a possible 120 points that you can earn this week, which is huge for your overall grade. Now, it would be easy to get stressed out about 2 big assignments like those, the midterm exam and your final research paper, being due in the same week. But I don't want you to get stressed, okay? Don't get overwhelmed by it. I want you to think of it really as the culmination of all of the work that you've already been putting in. All right, these aren't assignments that are going to be coming out of the blue. You've already been working on reading all 5 of the sources that I gave you for the topic, Who Freed the Slaves? You've even done a couple of source analyses on McPherson and Fields. So you already got a feel for how to read the sources, how to identify their main argument for who deserves the most credit for emancipation or bringing about the liberation of the slaves in America. And so you've gotten a feel now on how to do that for all 5 of the sources. You even put those notes together in step 2. So now really all you're doing is just taking all of the information you've already gathered and you're putting it into a paper, right? You're writing it out. And so essentially, each source can become its own paragraph or 2, right? So you need to cover what their main argument is. You need to cover how they support that argument. What facts and information do they present as evidence? What reasoning do they use, right? And then ultimately, you need to determine who is the most effective in their argument and why, all right? Again, these are all things that you've already been working on a couple of sources already with McPherson and Fields, where you've been graded on those, and then also in putting together your step 2 notes. So don't feel like you got to start from scratch, because you're not, right? You're just putting together all of the information you've already gathered. So hopefully that puts your mind at ease, right? Don't overthink it. Just rely on the work you've already done. And if you need to go back and revisit some of the sources, do that. You have some time. The midterm exam also isn't going to be coming out of the blue. These are going to be questions you've already seen on the previous quizzes. All right, so I'm just taking questions off of the previous quizzes covering chapters 1 through 9, and I'm putting them into this midterm exam that's worth 50 points. All right, so sorry about the noise there, but think of it this way. If you've already been reading the chapters, you've already been putting together the notes each week, and you've already taken the quizzes, these are questions that you will have already seen, right? So nothing's going to catch you by surprise here, all right? So don't overthink it. Don't get overwhelmed or overly stressed. I would just go back, compile your notes, get your textbook ready, and start your midterm exam as soon as possible. Complete that, and then use the rest of your time to put together your final research paper. And hopefully you've already started working on that. But if not, give yourself a few days to piece that together, okay? Now, let's talk about the main arguments really quick of each of your sources. I want to make sure that you guys are on track. So it starts with identifying their argument. Because if you don't correctly identify their argument, there's no way you're going to correctly identify their pieces of evidence, right? Their facts and information that they're using to support that argument, their reasoning and logic that they're using to support that argument. All right, so let's talk about each of the sources. I gave you Fields and McPherson, and I did that deliberately because they are arguing 2 opposite sides, right? McPherson is arguing that although the slaves deserve credit for their efforts, slaves were constantly fighting for their freedom from the very onset of slavery in America, but it didn't come to fruition until Lincoln was president. So he argues that although slaves deserve credit for their work and their efforts toward emancipation and liberation, really ultimately Lincoln was the key factor and therefore deserves the most credit. Okay, and he goes into reasons why it required Lincoln being president when he was president and the actions that he took in order to bring about emancipation and ultimately abolition. Okay, now Fields argues a different point. She says that in fact it was the efforts of the slaves themselves that forced different levels of government, starting with Union officers and then Congress and ultimately President Lincoln, to take action. So she's giving the most credit to the slaves and saying that every other level of government that followed really was responding to what the slaves had done in freeing themselves and fleeing to Union lines. And so she's saying that really they deserve the most credit. All right. Now you have three other sources. You have Foner, who is also going to give Lincoln the most credit. You have Goodhart, who's going to credit the slaves and the Union officers for their efforts toward emancipation. But he's really saying, again, it started with the slaves themselves. Right? So you've got really two that are arguing more so for the slaves really put things into motion and they deserve the most credit. You've got two arguing not, again, that the slaves didn't contribute, but that Lincoln was the most important pivotal factor toward emancipation and abolition. And then you have Manisha Sinha, and she is going to argue ultimately that it was a multi-causal event, that the slaves and abolitionists were already putting something into motion that then was picked up by Congress and by Lincoln, and ultimately it culminated in liberation of the slaves. Okay, so she's saying it's not that any one of those factors are less important, but they are all important. Okay, so she's kind of finding a middle ground, saying that it started with the slaves and abolitionists, but it ended with and culminated with Lincoln and Congress, and so therefore all the parties that were involved played a pivotal role. Without any one of them, it might not have happened when it happened. Okay, so we want to make sure that we understand all of those main arguments, because then you can really dig in and find their key pieces of evidence, and that's what's going to make an effective paper, right? It's an analysis of each source, which means you have to not only identify what they're saying, but how they're supporting what they're saying. And that's where those key pieces of facts and information and logic and reasoning are all parts of how they're arguing their main point. Okay? If you can identify those things and you can put those into a paragraph or two per source, you're going to do just fine on the research paper. Again, you've already been working toward this, so don't get overwhelmed. Just keep working on it. Put all of your information together, revisit some sources if you need to, and deliver your best work. And I'm sure you'll be just fine. You'll do just great on your research paper, okay? And then again, for your midterm exam, if you've been taking the quizzes, you've been gathering your notes, you've already seen these questions, they're just reappearing now in the form of an exam. Don't get stressed out, right? Tackle that one first. Give yourself time to finish up your research paper and put the finishing touches on that. All right. If you have any questions, send me an email. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great and very successful week.